Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Honestly, it's such a timely topic for this deep dive.
It really is. So, I want you to imagine staring at a completely blank calendar for the upcoming week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Just not a single meeting, no dentist appointments, no dinner plans, no blocked out time for productivity. Just this vast, empty expanse of white space on your screen.
Yeah, that's a rare sight.
It is. And, you have to ask yourself, does that image make you feel a deep sense of peace, or does it make your chest tighten with this, obscure rising panic?
I mean, for most of us, it's definitely the panic.
Exactly. If you're like most modern people living in this hyper-connected, hyper-productive society, it's probably the panic.
Yeah, we're conditioned for it.
Right. So today we are looking at a 2.5 millennia old text, specifically chapters 11 through 20 of the ancient text detailing the Tao, or the way. And it argues that your panic isn't a sign that you need to be doing more.
Right. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah. It argues that your panic over empty space is actually a glaring symptom of a society that has fundamentally forgotten how things actually work.
It is a remarkable section of text. I mean, it's incredibly dense.
Oh, totally.
And the concepts we're going to explore today, they fundamentally challenge the architectural blueprints of, how we construct our daily lives.
Yeah, and how we view leadership, too.
Exactly. Leadership, our own morality. It forces us to ask why we are so terrified of emptiness.
Terrified is definitely the right word. And as your guides on this deep dive, our mission is to extract the practical wisdom from these ancient words and, figure out what they actually mean for you, the listener, right now.
Because it applies to everyone.
Yeah. Whether you're stuck in traffic on a 6-lane highway or navigating some complex corporate hierarchy, or honestly just trying to find 5 minutes of peace in a noisy house.
Well, to do that effectively, we have to start by completely inverting how we perceive value.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, we live in a world obsessed with accumulation, right? Gathering wealth, gathering data, gathering accolades, gathering experiences.
Yeah, more is always better.
Right. We think fullness equals success. But the text begins by arguing that our fixation on fullness completely blinds us to where actual utility comes from.
Okay, let's get right into that, because the text uses some incredibly vivid physical imagery to make this point, especially in chapter 11.
It's one of my favorite passages.
Same. I actually want to read this directly because the visual is just stunning.
Yeah.
It says, the 30 spokes unite in the one nave, but it is on the empty space for the axle that the use of the wheel depends. And it goes on, it says, clay is fashioned into vessels, but it is on their empty hollowness that their use depends. The door and windows are cut out from the walls to form an apartment, but it is on the empty space within that its use depends.
It's just brilliant in its simplicity. I mean, let's examine the mechanics of what the author is saying here.
Okay.
If you look at a wooden cartwheel, what actually draws your eye?
Well, the wood, obviously, like the intricately carved spokes, maybe the heavy iron rim.
Right, the solid wooden hub in the center. The author calls this the positive existence. It's the material.
It's what you pay the wheelmaker for.
Exactly. But how does a wheel actually function? It only rotates because there's a perfectly measured empty hole in the dead center of the hub.
Yeah, for the axle.
Right. If that hole is filled with wood, if there's no empty space, the axle cannot slide through. The wheel cannot turn at all. It just becomes this heavy, useless piece of circular wood.
Oh, man. And the same goes for the clay cup, right? Like, you don't drink the ceramic, you utilize the void inside the ceramic. And yet, if I buy a coffee mug, I am entirely focused on, the color of the glaze or the shape of the handle or how thick the rim is. I'm obsessing over the walls.
We instinctively focus on the material because our brains are wired to interact with the physical world,
Right. We want to catch it.
We measure it, we trade it, we build it. But the profound realization here is that the material's only true purpose is to serve as a boundary for the empty space.
That's wild.
Yeah. The usefulness of the room is not the brick and mortar. The usefulness is the hollow volume of air inside where a human being can actually, live and move around.
Okay, I want to take this out of ancient cartwheels and clay pots and bring it right into our modern pockets.
Let's do it.
When I read this, I immediately thought about a smartphone. I mean, we spend collectively billions of dollars a year obsessing over the hardware.
Oh, absolutely.
The titanium casing, those microscopic camera lenses, the exact dimensions and durability of the glass.
Yeah.
We obsess over the walls of the device.
Yeah, the positive existence.
Right. But all of that physical existence is entirely useless without a blank screen waiting to receive input.
That is a very apt translation of the concept. It really is.
But I want to push this even further into our psychology. You mentioned earlier that our brains are wired to interact with the physical. But why are we so actively hostile to the empty space?
What do you mean?
Well, think back to the calendar analogy I started with. If someone looks at my calendar and sees a massive blank space, the immediate assumption isn't, oh, look at all that potential.
No, of course not.
The assumption is, he is wasting time. In modern corporate culture, unallocated time is viewed as a failure of optimization.
Ah, right. Well, what you're describing is a psychological phenomenon often referred to in art and physics as horror vacui, the fear of empty spaces.
The fear of empty spaces, wow.
Yeah, Aristotle actually argued that nature abhors a vacuum, and it seems like human psychology abhors a vacuum too.
We really do.
We have this deep-seated anxiety that if a space isn't filled with tangible, measurable activity, it represents a void. It represents non-existence.
And non-existence feels like a threat.
It feels akin to death, so we aggressively pack our schedules, our homes, and our minds with positive existence.
Yeah, we fill the room with so much furniture that we can no longer walk through it.
Exactly. We fill our day with so many meetings that we have no time to actually do the work the meetings are about.
Yes. The room ceases to be an apartment and becomes a storage locker. We're just walking around as storage lockers of stress and tasks. So how does the text suggest we actually fix this?
By recognizing that the invisible is just as real and often more foundational than the visible.
Okay, unpack that.
So chapter 14 expands on this by describing the Tao itself, the underlying reality of the universe. It calls it the equable because you look and don't see it.
Right.
It's the inaudible because you listen and don't hear it. It's the subtle because you try to grasp it and you just cannot get hold of it. It calls this the form of the formless.
The form of the formless. I mean, that sounds a bit mystical, right? What does that actually mean in a concrete sense?
Think about the fundamental forces that govern your physical reality. Gravity, time, electromagnetism, the turning of the seasons.
Okay, sure.
You cannot put gravity in a box and weigh it. You can't paint it red. You can't hear time passing. These forces are entirely formless and invisible.
Right, they just are.
Yet, if they cease to exist for a fraction of a second, the entire physical universe would instantly collapse.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The visible world is entirely dependent on the invisible framework that holds it up. The author is suggesting that just as gravity holds the planets, this empty space, this unforced natural rhythm, is what holds a human life or a society together.
So the practice for the listener here isn't just about throwing away physical clutter. It's about how we manage our time and our energy.
Absolutely.
But I have to play the skeptic here on behalf of our audience.
Go for it.
If someone listening to this says, okay, I get it, emptiness is useful, I am going to schedule nothingness into my workday.
Yeah.
If they just sit at their desk doing absolutely nothing for 2 hours to embrace the void, I mean, their manager's going to fire them. How do we practically apply this without blowing up our modern livelihoods?
It's an essential question because we can't just pretend we don't live in a highly structured, demanding society.
Right. Bills have to get paid.
Exactly. The practical application isn't about negligent abandonment of your duties. It's about strategic idleness.
Strategic idleness.
Yeah. It is about protecting the hub of your wheel so the spokes can actually turn.
Give me a concrete mechanism for that. How does strategic idleness actually work?
It works by intentionally designing micro margins into your life. In a work context, it means fiercely protecting a 30-minute block in your day where no input is allowed.
None at all.
None. No emails, no podcasts, no reading articles. It is creating a vacuum.
Okay, I can see how that would be hard.
It is, but neurologically, this is critical. When you stop bombarding your brain with external stimuli, a network in your brain called the default mode network activates.
The default mode network.
Yes. This is the network responsible for deep problem-solving, autobiographical memory, and spontaneous creativity.
Wow. Okay.
When you are constantly focused on a task, the positive existence of your day, your brain suppresses this network. You literally cannot have those sudden aha moments of insight if you don't allow the empty space for them to emerge into.
That makes total sense. We've all experienced that, right? Like, the stereotype is that you always get your best ideas in the shower.
Yes, exactly.
And why is that? Because you are physically trapped in a box where you can't check your phone or write an email. It's one of the few places where we're basically forced to experience empty space.
Exactly. The text is urging us to manufacture those shower moments throughout our entire lives rather than relying on them by accident.
But this forces a bigger question. If this is just basic human neurology, like if our brains literally need emptiness to function properly, and if a wheel obviously needs a hole to spin, why did this ancient author need to write this down? Why do humans need to be constantly reminded of this?
It's a fair question.
Like, what was going on in the author's world that made them look around and say, we have completely lost the plot?
That historical context is crucial, actually, because this text wasn't written by someone sitting on a cloud, meditating in perfect peace.
Right.
It was forged in the fires of a deeply troubled society. Historians generally place the compilation of the Tao Te Ching around the Warring States period of ancient China, or at least reflecting the societal breakdown leading into it.
Warring States. I mean, that doesn't sound like a peaceful, meditative era.
No, not at all. It was a period of brutal, relentless conflict. Feudal lords were constantly battling for supremacy.
So massive instability.
Massive. There was mass conscription, political backstabbing, severe social instability. It was a time of immense anxiety.
Wow.
And we see this explicitly reflected when we synthesize chapters 17 and 18. The author isn't describing a utopia.
Here, they're diagnosing a problem.
Yes. They mention a time when states and clans fell into disorder and when harmony no longer prevailed through what they call the 6 kinships.
Hold on, let's clarify that for the listener. What are the 6 kinships?
In the cultural context of ancient China, society was deeply organized around familial and social hierarchies. The 6 kinships generally refer to the foundational relationships: father and son, elder and younger brother, husband and wife.
Okay, so the core family unit.
Exactly. These were the atomic bonds of their society. The author is saying that these most basic, natural bonds of human connection were fraying and snapping.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah, family members were turning on each other for political gain or survival.
So the very fabric of society is tearing apart. That changes how I read this completely. It isn't just abstract philosophy, it's emergency triage.
That's a great way to put it.
How does the author trace the root cause of this breakdown, though?
Interestingly, they trace it through the evolution, or rather, the devolution of leadership, which we see in chapter 17.
Okay, how does that work?
The text outlines a 4-stage timeline of rulers. Let me walk you through it, because the modern parallels are striking.
Go for it.
The text says that in the highest antiquity, the Golden Age, the people did not even know their rulers existed.
Wait, they didn't know they existed? How is that a good leader? A leader you don't even know is there.
We will come back to that because it's the crux of the argument. But let's look at the decline first.
Okay.
In the next stage, the people loved and praised their rulers.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Right, but then in the third age, they feared them. And in the final age, they despised them.
Okay, well, the progression from fear to being despised makes perfect sense. I mean, a tyrant rules by fear, and eventually the populace hates him.
Exactly.
But the jump from unknown to loved and praised is where my brain stalls.
Because of our modern conditioning.
Right. In our modern corporate or political culture, a loved and praised leader is the absolute pinnacle of success. We want the visionary CEO who gives the inspiring TED Talk.
We really do.
We want the charismatic politician who makes us feel hopeful. Why is the text positioning a praised leader as the first step towards societal collapse?
Because of what the praise represents. Let's look at the underlying mechanics of visibility. Why is a leader visible?
Usually when there's a big announcement.
Or when they have to actively intervene to fix something that is broken. If a company is running perfectly, the CEO doesn't need to be making emergency speeches every week, right? The systems are functioning.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
The author is arguing that the heavy-handedness, the visibility, and even the charisma of a leader are symptoms that the natural order has already failed.
Wow.
When the earliest, best rulers governed, the text says they were reticent. They valued their words. They didn't make grand declarations or constantly meddle in the daily lives of the people.
So they were hands-off.
They acted like the empty hub of the wheel. They held the space, they maintained the boundaries, but they let the people do the actual turning.
And the result of that invisible leadership.
The text explicitly says the result was that work was done, undertakings were successful, and the people all said, "We are as we are of ourselves."
We are as we are of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredible. They felt complete autonomy.
Yeah.
They felt like they accomplished everything naturally, on their own, without some savior swooping in.
Yes. But when you move to the second age, the age of the praised leader, it means the leader is stepping in to be a hero. And if you need a hero, it means you are in danger.
Oh, that's so true.
The leader is now solving problems that the society can no longer solve for itself. The reliance shifts from the natural collective harmony to the individual at the top.
And once you rely on the individual at the top,
It's only a matter of time before that power corrupts, leading to fear and eventually being despised.
that reframes so much of how we view hero worship in business today.
Mm-hmm.
Like the CEO who comes in, fires half the staff, completely restructures the company, and gets on the cover of a magazine. We call that great leadership.
We do.
But this text calls it a tragic necessity of a broken system.
Exactly. And this leads us directly into chapter 18, which takes this concept of treating the symptoms of a broken system and applies it not just to leadership, but to our fundamental concepts of morality and virtue.
Yeah, this is where things get really controversial. Chapter 18 presents a paradox about virtue that completely stopped me in my tracks.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It claims, when the great Tao ceased to be observed, benevolence and righteousness came into vogue. And it goes on to say that loyal ministers appeared only when states fell into disorder.
Right.
Now, I have to play the proxy for the listener again, and I'm going to push back hard on this.
Please do.
Are you telling me that benevolence, which is kindness and goodwill, and righteousness, which is a sense of justice and fairness, are bad things?
No, not exactly.
Because to a modern ear, saying benevolence and righteousness came into vogue sounds like a massive societal upgrade. It sounds like a civil rights movement. It sounds like progress. How on earth is the text painting their appearance as a tragedy?
It's deeply counterintuitive because we are culturally conditioned to view the naming and enforcing of morality as the definition of a civilized society.
Right. We want rules.
But we have to look at the cause and effect relationship the text is drawing. The author isn't saying that humans being kind to one another is bad.
Okay.
The author is pointing out a sociological reality. You do not need to explicitly name, mandate, or build massive institutional frameworks around a virtue unless that virtue is no longer naturally occurring.
Okay, break that down for me. Give me an example.
Let's take the loyal minister example from the text. A minister's job is to serve the state, right?
Yep.
In a healthy, functioning government where everyone is aligned toward the common good, loyalty is simply the baseline reality. It's like breathing. You don't hand out awards to people for breathing.
That's true.
But when do we suddenly start praising someone as a loyal minister?
Well, when everyone else is taking bribes, betraying the king, and actively committing treason.
Precisely. You only celebrate loyalty when treason is the pervasive threat. The appearance of the term loyal minister as a high compliment is proof that the state has fallen into disorder.
Wow. Okay, I see it.
The text applies the same logic to benevolence and righteousness. When the great Tao, which we can understand here as the natural, effortless way of living in balance with one another, is lost, human empathy degrades, people start exploiting each other.
And so society panics and tries to invent rules to force people to act the way they used to act naturally.
Yes. Benevolence and righteousness coming into vogue is a symptom of a sick society trying to medicate itself with ethical frameworks and laws. It's a sign of artificiality replacing natural instinct.
Okay, I'm tracking with the logic now. If you have to put up a stop sign, it means people are crashing at the intersection.
That's a great way to look at it.
The stop sign is righteousness. It's good that it's there to prevent crashes, but its existence proves that the intersection is inherently dangerous. But this leads us to the author's solution in chapter 19, and I am telling you right now, modern listeners are going to fiercely resist this. I mean, I resisted it.
I don't blame you.
Because the author doesn't just point out that these virtues are Band-Aids, they demand we rip the Band-Aids off.
It is arguably the most radical prescription in the entire philosophical tradition.
Chapter 19 demands that we renounce our sageness and discard our wisdom, claiming it would be better for the people 100-fold.
Yeah.
And then it drops the hammer. If we could renounce our benevolence and discard our righteousness, the people would again become filial and kindly.
It's intense.
Let me explain why this feels impossible to accept. We spend literally billions of dollars on education, on acquiring wisdom and sageness.
Yes, we do.
We pour massive resources into corporate social responsibility to prove our benevolence. We build entire social justice movements to enforce righteousness. If we discard all of that, doesn't history show us that the strong simply exploit the weak? If we don't explicitly teach kids right from wrong, don't we just get a Hobbesian state of nature where life is nasty, brutish, and short? It sounds like telling people to just embrace anarchy and cruelty.
I completely understand the resistance, but it's vital that we impartially dissect what is actually being targeted here.
Okay, help me out.
The text is absolutely not advocating for a return to brutal, primitive ignorance where the strong prey on the weak. We know this because the promised end result in the text is that the people would again become filial and kindly, and there would be no thieves nor robbers.
Right, the goal is peace.
Yeah.
But how does stripping away the rules get us to peace?
Because the attack here is directed specifically at performative virtue. It is an attack on what the author calls artful contrivances.
Artful contrivances, okay.
The author is observing a society where wisdom is no longer about deep understanding. It has become a cunning tool for political manipulation. Benevolence is no longer genuine care. It's a strategic public relations move to pacify the masses. Righteousness is no longer about fairness. It's used as a weapon to bludgeon ideological opponents.
Wow, okay, that hits home.
When morality becomes institutionalized, it becomes something you can gain. It becomes a currency you can use to elevate yourself above others.
Virtue signaling.
Exactly. The text is arguing that by discarding this forced, scheming, ego-driven morality, the heavy, artificial layers of societal pressure are stripped away. And when you strip away the pressure to perform goodness, natural, unforced human kindness and empathy can organically reemerge.
Let me try a modern analogy here to see if I'm fully grasping this, because I think this connects perfectly to something a lot of us have experienced in the corporate world.
I'd love to hear it.
Think about a truly toxic workplace. Have you ever worked for a company that has giant posters in the break room or plastered across their intranet, reminding people about their core values?
Yeah.
Posters that say things like integrity, respect, and teamwork.
I think almost everyone listening has encountered an environment exactly like that.
Right. Now, in my experience, a company that has to aggressively brand and constantly mandate those virtues is almost always a company that completely lacks them.
Spot on.
The managers are micromanaging, the colleagues are backstabbing each other for promotions, and the leadership is entirely opaque. So HR puts up a poster demanding respect.
Yeah, as if a poster fixes it.
Exactly. But consider a genuinely healthy, functional team. A team where people actually trust each other. They don't need posters. They don't need a 50-page employee handbook demanding benevolence toward their coworkers.
No, because they just live it.
Right. They just organically act it out because the environment itself is harmonious. The posters, the artful contrivances are just a superficial Band-Aid over a toxic culture.
That is a phenomenal exact translation of the ancient context into a 21st century reality. The mandate in the text to discard our righteousness is the command to take down the corporate posters.
Stop pretending!
Yes, start pretending. Stop forcing people to recite the core values, and instead fix the underlying culture so the values occur naturally.
But applying wisdom with discernment here, we have to draw a line. We are obviously not saying that we should literally dismantle our modern justice systems or shut down our schools.
Right.
I mean, we live in a world of 8 billion people. We need some structural rules.
Without question. We cannot blindly map an ancient agrarian feudal philosophy onto a hyper-complex, densely populated modern world without nuance.
Right.
Institutional structures are necessary to prevent the strong from exploiting the weak in a globalized society. However, the enduring wisdom here is to cultivate a deep, piercing skepticism of our own motivations.
How so?
We must be fiercely honest with ourselves about where our actions are actually what the text calls scheming for gain, masked as righteousness.
Oh, that is a tough mirror to look into.
It is. The text forces you to ask yourself, are you pursuing wisdom to truly understand the world, or are you acquiring knowledge so you can feel superior to people who know less than you? Are you acting benevolently because it flows naturally from your character, or are you doing it because you want the social credit, the tax write-off, or the reputation of being seen as a good person?
Yeah, or posting about a social cause online because you genuinely care versus just being terrified of being seen as unrighteous by your peers.
Exactly.
If we're honest, a lot of our modern benevolence is deeply tied to our ego. It's performative. We want the credit.
And that ego is exactly what the text tackles next. If we accept that our virtues are often unofficial, how do we actually strip away those layers?
How do we stop performing?
Right. How do we get back to that natural harmony?
And the answer the author gives is profound. They shift the focus from the macro level of society and politics right down to the micro level of the individual body and mind.
It's a brilliant pivot.
Chapters 12, 13, and 15 form this cohesive guide for navigating the self in a world that is constantly trying to pull us into performative chaos.
Yes. The text essentially says, if you want to fix the state, you have to start by fixing how you relate to your own physical existence and your own desires.
And here is where it gets really interesting, because chapter 12 uses a very visceral biological metaphor to explain our desires.
Oh, I love this metaphor.
It says, therefore the sage seeks to satisfy the craving of the belly and not the insatiable longing of the eyes. He puts from him the latter and prefers to seek the former. Let's break down the belly versus the eyes.
It's a striking contrast between finite physical reality and infinite abstract desire. Let's look at the biology of the belly.
Okay.
The craving of the belly represents our actual grounding physical needs. Food, water, shelter, warmth. These needs have a built-in biological mechanism for satisfaction.
Right. Like you eat a meal.
Yeah, if you are hungry, you eat. Eventually, your stomach stretches, stretch receptors send a signal to your brain, leptin is released, and your brain says, stop eating, I am full.
The body naturally regulates itself.
Exactly. Satisfying the belly brings a natural resting point.
Okay, so the belly is finite. It can be satisfied. What about the eyes?
The text calls the longing of the eyes insatiable. The eyes represent our interaction with the external world of comparison, status, and abstract desire.
And there's no limit to that.
None. Unlike the stomach, the eyes have no internal shut-off valve. You can look at a beautiful house, and then look at a bigger one, and then look at a mansion, and your eyes never send a signal to your brain saying, I have seen enough wealth, I am full.
Wow. When I translate that to today, the insatiable longing of the eyes is the most perfect description of modern consumerism I have ever heard.
Oh.
It's the superficial comparisons we make. And most acutely, it's the endless dopamine loop of digital feeds. It is doom scrolling on social media.
Doom scrolling is the modern embodiment of this.
It really is. Think about the neuroscience of scrolling. You're feeding visual information into your eyes, looking for novelty, looking for status, looking for outrage. And the algorithms are explicitly designed to ensure you never reach a stopping point. There's always one more post, one more video. Our eyes are just consuming, and they are never, ever full.
Never full.
And the text says the sage puts from him the latter. He actively turns away from the infinite scroll of comparison and focuses on the grounding reality of what he actually needs.
And the reason we get trapped in the longing of the eyes is because we are so deeply attached to our ego and how others perceive us.
Yeah, we care too much.
Which brings us directly to the vulnerability discussed in Chapter 13. This chapter challenges how we view success and failure. It states that favor and disgrace are equally to be feared, and that they are tied to what the author calls having the body.
This chapter was tough for me. The text says, what makes me liable to great calamity is my having the body. If I had not the body, what great calamity could come to me?
It's a startling thought.
Right. At first read, that sounds incredibly fatalistic, or like it's saying we should hate our physical existence. Oh, woe is me, I am trapped in this meat sack, and that's why I suffer.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
It sounds almost like a call for extreme asceticism or self-harm.
If we read it superficially, it can certainly sound that way. But again, applying wisdom with discernment, we must look deeper at what the body represents here.
So it's not literal.
It's not about hating the physical form. The body here is a proxy for the localized self-from, the ego, the identity, the social standing. Let's look at the concept of favor and disgrace.
Okay.
We usually spend our entire lives chasing favor promotions, praise, wealth, status, and we spend equal energy terrified of disgrace, getting fired, being publicly shamed, losing our wealth.
Right. Because favor is good and disgrace is bad.
We think so, but the text lumps them together as personal conditions of the exact same kind. Why?
Because they both require an audience.
Exactly, and they both create immense vulnerability. Why is disgrace dangerous? Because it lowers your status and threatens your ego. But why is favor dangerous?
Because the moment you acquire favor, you are terrified of losing it.
Yes.
If you get a massive promotion, your stress doesn't go away. It mutates into the fear of underperforming and losing the job.
Oh.
If you gain 1 million followers online, you are suddenly terrified of being canceled.
Perfectly stated. The higher you climb, the further you can fall. Both favor and disgrace only matter because we identify so completely with our ego and our physical position in the social hierarchy.
Yeah.
As long as you believe that you are your job title or you are your bank account, you are liable to great calamity.
So the text is saying that as long as we are identifying completely with our ego, we are constantly vulnerable. But surely the answer isn't to just stop caring about everything, right? If a leader just stops caring about their body and their ego, Don't they just become reckless?
That is the genius pivot at the end of chapter 13. The author doesn't conclude that we should detach into apathy.
Thank goodness.
The text offers a profound recalibration. It says, "Therefore he who would administer the kingdom, honoring it as he honors his own person, may be employed to govern it. And he who would administer it with the love which he bears to his own person may be entrusted with it."
Oh, wow. So it's not about rejecting the self. It's about taking the natural protective love you have for your own vulnerable body and extending that exact same care outward.
Precisely. It is a radical empathy rooted in shared vulnerability. You recognize your own fragility. You recognize that you are afraid of disgrace and hunger.
Right.
And instead of trying to armor your ego with favor to protect yourself, you use that recognition to care for everyone else. You look at the people you lead and realize they are just as physically and emotionally vulnerable as I am.
That's beautiful.
If you govern with that kind of empathetic love, you can be trusted with power.
But let's be real. Achieving that state where you aren't chasing the insatiable desires of the eyes, where you aren't terrified of losing favor, where you're extending radical empathy, that requires a completely clear, balanced mind.
It definitely does.
And most of us have minds that feel like a hurricane. How does one actually achieve this balanced state?
Chapter 15 provides what is arguably the most beautiful and actionable imagery in the entire text for dealing with a chaotic mind.
Okay, what is it?
It asks this stunning question: who can make the muddy water clear?
Muddy water. That perfectly diagnoses the modern mental condition.
It really does.
Our minds are agitated, swirling with information, anxieties, emails, political outrage, and desires. The silt is completely stirred up. We can't see to the bottom.
And how do we usually try to fix a chaotic mind in our culture?
By taking action. If I feel anxious, I immediately try to do something about it. I read 10 articles on how to cure anxiety. I download a new productivity app to organize my stress.
Right, more tools.
I try to forcibly meditate, which usually just means I sit there getting angry that I can't stop thinking. I listen to another self-help deep dive.
We constantly intervene. Think about the physics of muddy water in a glass. If you have a glass of water with dirt swirling around in it, how do you make it clear? Do you shake it harder?
I don't know.
Do you reach your hand in and try to manually pick out the individual particles of dirt?
No. Any action you take to fix it just agitates the silt further.
Exactly. The text gives the only scientifically sound answer: let it be still, and it will gradually become clear. The only solution is the cessation of movement. You must stop intervening.
Let it be still.
Way.
The practice here for the listener is profound, but it is incredibly difficult. When you are overwhelmed, when the muddy water of your mind is completely opaque with stress, your instinct will be to scramble for a solution.
Always.
The practice here is to simply stop.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a time when I was incredibly burned out, and I decided I was going to fix it by getting really into mindfulness.
How did that go?
Horribly. I downloaded an app, and I started tracking my mindful minutes obsessively. If I missed a day, I got stressed out about not meditating. I had turned stillness into a competitive sport. I was just stirring the muddy water with a different spoon. It wasn't until I gave up the effort to succeed at meditating and literally just sat on my porch staring at a tree without any goal that the silt actually started to settle.
That is a perfect example of what the text means when it notes, "Let movement go on, and the condition of rest will gradually arise."
Yeah.
You do not force the rest. You allow it to emerge naturally from the stillness. The psychological relief of giving up the effort to forcibly fix your mind is immense.
But here's the massive reality check. We have talked about some beautiful concepts today.
Yes.
Scheduling emptiness, discarding performative virtue, quieting the eyes, letting the muddy water settle.
It's a lot.
But choosing to actually live this way, choosing this path, is going to make you feel very, very out of place in modern society.
Yeah.
It's going to make you an outcast.
It is.
And that brings us to the final chapters we are examining today, chapters 16 and 20, which deal heavily with comparative insight and the deep alienation of the wise.
It is an inevitable, heavy consequence of this path, and the author does not shy away from it. Chapter 16 establishes the foundational law of nature we are dealing with.
Okay, what's the law?
It observes that all things in their luxuriant growth must eventually return to their root. A massive oak tree grows wildly in the summer, but in the winter, the sap returns to the roots. And the text says this returning to the root is what we call the state of stillness. It asserts that knowing this unchanging rule is true intelligence.
So true intelligence is knowing that everything, no matter how loud or expansive, eventually cycles back to stillness and emptiness.
Yes, but as you pointed out, human society does not reward returning to the root. Society rewards the luxuriant growth.
Oh, absolutely.
It rewards the noise, the hustle, the expansion, the endless GDP growth, the bigger house.
Which means the person who aligns with the Tao, the person who actively seeks stillness and emptiness, is going to look like a failure to everyone else. And they are going to feel profoundly alienated.
It's a harsh reality.
Chapter 20 paints an incredibly vivid, almost melancholic picture of this exact psychological experience. The author writes, "The multitude of men look satisfied and pleased, as if enjoying a full banquet, as if mounted on a tower in spring." That's everyone else. That's the culture around them.
Yeah, the people feasting on fullness.
But then the speaker looks at themselves and confesses, "I alone seem listless and still. I am like an infant which has not yet smiled. I look dejected and forlorn, as if I had no home to go to."
It is a heartbreakingly honest confession of feeling entirely out of step with the world around you.
It really is.
The author looks at the multitude who all have enough and to spare, while they alone seem to have lost everything. They say, "My mind is that of a stupid man. I am in a state of chaos."
I cannot emphasize enough how deeply relatable this is today. When I read this, I immediately thought about the digital world we all live in.
Oh, totally.
Think about logging onto LinkedIn or Instagram on a Tuesday afternoon. Everyone on there looks bright and intelligent, right?
Yeah.
They're the multitude enjoying the banquet.
Exactly.
They're all celebrating their promotions, announcing their new startups, posting photos of their perfect vacations, showcasing their incredible productivity. The text says they are full of discrimination and they all have their spheres of action. They are crushing it.
They are completely engaged in the positive existence, the heavy material of the wheel.
And while everyone else is broadcasting their absolute certainty and purpose, the person trying to find stillness, the seeker of the Tao, is sitting there feeling, as the text says, dull and confused. They feel like they are carried about as on the sea, drifting as if I had nowhere to rest.
The author even uses a specific term to describe how out of place they feel. They say they feel like a rude borderer.
Right. I saw that phrase and wasn't entirely sure what it meant. What is a rude borderer?
In the context of ancient Chinese civilization, the cultural center was highly refined, ritualistic, and ordered. To be a borderer meant you lived on the fringes of civilization, out in the wild frontiers.
Ah.
You were uncultured, unrefined, lacking the sophistication of the city dwellers. The author saying, I look at all these sophisticated politicians and merchants playing their societal games, and I feel like an uncultured idiot who doesn't know how the game is played.
Drifting as if I had nowhere to rest. That is the exact feeling of scrolling through a feed of hyper-successful people while you are sitting in your living room just trying to find a moment of peace.
Yes.
You feel dull. You feel incapable. You feel like the person who didn't get the invite to the banquet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a profound comparative insight. We see this exact archetype across almost all broad human wisdom traditions.
Vacui.
Whether it is the desert monks in early Christianity, the Sufi mystics in Islam, or the ascetics in Hinduism, there is the archetype of the contemplative, the prophet, or the seeker who feels like a complete alien in a hyper-materialistic society.
The outside.
Exactly. There is a universal historical tension between the inner spiritual journey toward emptiness and the outer societal rat race toward fullness. When you stop playing the game of acquiring favor, wealth, and performative virtue, the people who are still frantically playing the game will look at you like you're a fool.
And what's worse, you might even feel like a fool yourself. The author admits to feeling like a stupid man. The isolation is real. If you decide to step off the treadmill, your friends might genuinely ask you, "What's wrong? Are you depressed? Why aren't you striving for more?"
Yes, but here's the critical reframing that makes the entire journey worth it. This feeling of being stupid or incapable in the eyes of the world is not a failure.
It's not.
It is the necessary cost of admission for valuing what truly matters.
Explain that.
The very last line of chapter 20 delivers the ultimate punchline to all this alienation and melancholy. After complaining about how dull and stupid they feel compared to the multitude, the author says, I alone am different from other men, but I value the nursing mother.
The nursing mother. They're referring to the Tao, the source of all things.
Exactly. The author's saying, yes, I look dull. Yes, I look like I am missing out on the great banquet of societal success and wealth. Yes, I look like a rude borderer. But that is because I am being nourished by something far deeper.
Wow.
I am tapped into the foundational reality of the universe, while the multitude is entirely ignoring the rude, while they gorge themselves on the superficial junk food of the banquet.
So for the listener, this is the ultimate takeaway. If you have ever felt that deep, isolating disconnection from the hustle culture around you,
Yeah.
if you've ever looked at the performative virtue and the frantic grasping of the world and thought, I don't want any part of this, but then felt guilty or lazy for feeling that way, well, this text is telling you to reframe that feeling.
Absolutely.
Do not see your desire for stillness as a defect. Do not see your moments of societal disconnection as a failure to keep up. See them as profound clarity. It is the realization that the banquet is actually making everyone sick, and you are holding out for real nourishment.
It takes immense courage to be the empty hub in a world that only values the spinning spokes. It requires you to be comfortable with being misunderstood.
It really does. This entire text is a masterclass in challenging our most basic assumptions. It tells us that emptiness is more useful than fullness, that invisible leadership is better than heroism, that forced righteousness is a sign of decay, and that feeling like an outcast might be the strongest proof that you're actually on the right path.
As we wrap up this extensive exploration, I want to offer one final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over and explore on your own.
Lay it on us.
We have talked at length about how emptiness is where true utility lies and how stillness is what ultimately clears the muddy water of the mind. We've talked about the fear of the blank calendar.
Right.
So looking at your own life right now, what is one full or noisy thing you can completely remove from your routine this week? And the challenge here is vital. Do not remove it so you can replace it with something better or more productive.
Just remove it.
Exactly. Remove it simply to let the empty space exist. What would happen to the clarity of your mind if you just let the hollowness remain?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.